7 models who grace the covers of the world's most prestigious magazines. 7 deaths that expose the darkest side of the most glamorous industry on earth. These are the real stories behind how the fashion world lost some of its most iconic faces. Gia Carangi. Before Cindy Crawford, before Naomi Campbell, before any of the names the world came to know in the 1990s, there was Gia. Gia Carangi was arguably the first true supermodel, a Philadelphia girl who walked into the fashion world at 17, and within 2 years was on the covers of Vogue and Cosmopolitan simultaneously, booking campaigns for Armani, Dior, Versace, and YSL, commanding the kind of attention that stopped rooms. Cindy Crawford was specifically referred to as Baby Gia when she first started because photographers who loved Gia were desperate to find her replacement. That is how dominant she was. And then heroin took everything. She missed shoots, walked off sets to buy drugs, fell asleep in front of cameras. By the early 1980s, she was blacklisted from every major agency. By 1983, her career was over. She was one of the first famous women in America to be diagnosed with AIDS, at a time when the disease was so poorly understood that hospital staff treating her wore full hazmat suits. She died on November 18, 1986, at the age of 26, in a Philadelphia hospital weighing 75 pounds with her mother beside her. Nobody from the fashion world came. Nobody called. The industry that had built itself on her face, her body, and her talent simply moved on without her. She died alone in a hospital bed at 26, and the fashion world did not pause for a single second. The next model on this list had a career that burned even brighter and ended even more violently. Dorothy Stratton. She was 20 years old when she was murdered. Dorothy Stratton was a Canadian girl from Vancouver who was discovered working at a Dairy Queen by a man named Paul Snyder, a small-time promoter who immediately saw her potential and pushed her toward Playboy. She became Playmate of the Year in 1980 and was in the middle of transitioning from modeling into acting when her estranged husband, Paul Snyder, murdered her on August 14, 1980. Snyder had become consumed by jealousy and rage as Dorothy's career accelerated away from him. She had begun a relationship with director Peter Bogdanovich and had been working to separate herself from Snyder legally and personally. On that August morning, Snyder lured her to their former shared home in Los Angeles under the pretense of discussing their divorce settlement. He shot her with a shotgun. He then died by suicide in the same room. Dorothy Stratton was 20 years old. She had appeared in one film and had several more in development. The story of Dorothy Stratton is ultimately the story of what happens when a controlling and violent man cannot accept that the woman he tried to own has outgrown him. The next model on this list also died young, first, but in circumstances so strange and so public that they changed the rules of an entire industry. Luisel Ramos. She was 22 years old and working as a model in Montevideo when she collapsed on a runway during Montevideo Fashion Week on August 2, 2006. She fell to the ground as she was leaving the catwalk and was pronounced dead shortly after. The cause of death was heart failure caused by severe malnutrition and anorexia. Her father later revealed she had been surviving on lettuce leaves and Diet Cola for 3 months before she died. She weighed 44 kilograms at the time of her death, around 97 pounds. She had been told repeatedly by agencies that her weight was still too high. 6 months after Luisel died, her younger sister, Eliana Ramos, died of the same cause at the age of 18 while visiting her grandparents in Montevideo. Same family, same industry, same cause. 6 months apart. The reaction from the fashion world was impossible to ignore. Within months of Eliana's death, the organizers of Madrid and Milan Fashion Weeks announced new minimum body mass index requirements for models walking their runways, the first industry-wide standards of this kind in history. 2 sisters had to die before anyone changed anything. The next model's death was different from anything else on this list because it happened in a completely different kind of spotlight. Anna Nicole Smith. She was one of the most recognizable women in America throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, a Playmate of the Year, a Guess Jeans model, a reality TV star, and the widow of an 89-year-old oil billionaire whose estate she fought for in a legal battle that went all the way to the Supreme Court. On February 8, 2007, she was found unresponsive in her hotel room at the Seminole Hard Rock Hotel in Hollywood, Florida. She was 39 years old. The cause of death was accidental combined drug intoxication. 9 different prescription medications were found in her system simultaneously, including chloral hydrate and various benzodiazepines. No single drug was present in a lethal amount. The combination was what killed her. Her death came just 5 months after the death of her 20-year-old son, Daniel, who died of a combined drug overdose in the hospital room where she had just given birth to her daughter, Danny Lynn. The investigation into her death, the legal battle over her estate, the question of who fathered her daughter, all of it played out in the most public and undignified way imaginable. She died surrounded by 9 different prescription drugs, alone in a hotel room, 5 months after burying her son. The next death on this list is the most mysterious on this entire list, because nobody knows what actually happened. Ruslana Korshunova. She was called the Russian Rapunzel, a Kazakhstani model with extraordinary long blonde hair and deep gray eyes who had worked with Vera Wang, appeared in Vogue, and by the age of 20, had built a career that most models spend a lifetime chasing. On June 28, 2008, Ruslana Korshunova fell from the 9th-floor balcony of her apartment building on Water Street in Lower Manhattan. She was 20 years old. Her death was ruled a suicide. What made it so haunting was how sudden and unexplained it seemed to everyone who knew her. Friends described her as happy and looking forward to the future in the days before she died. Her social media showed no signs of distress. She had been active online the day before her death. Her family and some of her friends disputed the suicide ruling and suggested she may have been involved with a Russian cult-like self-help group that had allegedly been psychologically manipulating members. No criminal charges were ever filed. No alternative explanation was officially accepted. She was 20 years old and fell from a 9th-floor balcony in Manhattan, and nobody knows with complete certainty why. The next model on this list died not from one dramatic event, but from years of quiet destruction that the industry around her either ignored or enabled. Anna Carolina Reston. She was 21 years old and had been working as a model since her early teens, when she died in a Sao Paulo hospital on November 14, 2006. The same year as Luisel Ramos, she weighed 88 pounds at the time of her death. She was 5 feet 8 inches tall. The cause of death was generalized infection resulting from anorexia nervosa. Her organs had been so severely compromised by years of starvation that her body could no longer fight off a basic infection. Hospital staff reported she had been surviving almost entirely on apples and tomatoes. She had been told by a modeling agency in China during a work trip that she was too fat. She was a teenager at the time. What followed was years of increasingly severe restriction that her family said they were powerless to stop because the industry kept booking her and she kept working. She died in November 2006, weighing 88 pounds after a life spent chasing an ideal of thinness that the fashion industry had defined, promoted, and enforced. Her death alongside the Ramos sisters in the same year created a moment of reckoning in fashion that was long overdue and is arguably still incomplete. The final model on this list died in a way that had nothing to do with the industry, and everything to do with the man in her life, Wilhelmina Cooper. She was one of the most powerful women in the history of modeling, not just as a model, but as an industry builder. Wilhelmina Cooper founded the Wilhelmina Models Agency in 1967 after a highly successful career as one of the most booked models of the 1950s and 1960s, appearing on the covers of Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, and Cosmopolitan more times than almost any model of her era. She had graced over 300 magazine covers and had been one of the defining faces of her generation before she stepped behind the camera and built one of the most respected modeling agencies in the world. On March 1, 1980, Wilhelmina Cooper died of lung cancer at the Memorial Hospital for Cancer and Allied Diseases in New York City. She was 40 years old. She had been diagnosed with lung cancer the previous year and died less than 12 months after her diagnosis. Her agency continued operating after her death and remains one of the most recognized names in the modeling industry today. She built something that outlasted her by decades, which is more than the fashion industry gave most of the women on this list. She was 40 years old and left behind an industry she had helped shape, a company that carried her name forward, and a legacy that every model who came after her benefited from whether they knew it or not. Those were 7 of the most iconic models in history and the real stories behind how they died. If this video hit different, subscribe to Cause of Death. New videos every week going deep on the most famous deaths in history across fashion, entertainment, sport, and beyond. Drop a comment telling us who you want covered next. We read every single one.